Okay, so today is the 6th of September 2013. We're at the CARES Convention Center interviewing Allan Jago, and interviewing you is Deborah van Plaat and myself, Janina Gosseye. So thank you for talking to us. And well, the question that we usually start with is, what architectural qualifications did you gain, when and from which institution?
Right. I was a daytime worker and a nighttime studier when I went to Brisbane in about 1958, I think, from North Queensland to study at the Technical College for the first 3 years, and then the Queensland University after that for the remaining years. And during that first 3 years and subsequent 3 years, I think, 4 years, I worked for Plaat, and Partners, which was one of the biggest of Allan Jago and Plaat, and Partners were the two big practices in Brisbane. And the experiences they gave me at Plaat were very wide and varied, which I think probably was far greater than any other of my colleagues. Because they were involved in such a wide range of things, and all those partners had different views. Some were more oriented towards housing, some were oriented towards commercial buildings, some towards shopping centres and so forth. In fact, the Toowoomba Shopping Town was one of those projects that I was involved in doing the preliminary investigations for trade and traffic counts, and then involved in some of the planning and model building and so forth. And also at that stage we were involved in building shopping centres, and the big one up at Ipswich I was involved in with the model and sketching and so forth, and that sort of work. But we were also involved in little projects like the primitive coffee lounge in the arcade in Brisbane, which went through from Queen Street to Adelaide Street. That was one of these little places where it brought culture together. The artistic people, and the coffee lounge was actually tucked in underneath the footpath. And this was a little tiny, narrow block of a shop that was gutted, and we built all these little boutique shops. We were also doing things like home units at Hamilton and things
and
like Torbreck.
While you were studying and working at Plaat, and who were you working with primarily at Plaat?
All of the partners. I was working on a house for the manager of a fashion shop in Queen Street, the Tiers, and not only was I detailing everything in the house, but after, as a private venture, Mrs. Tier asked me to build her a hi-fi system. So I built an amplifier and set it all up for her in the units that I designed when I was in the office. Building amplifiers and so forth was a hobby.
So you started in 1958?
1958,
so you
yes.
Graduated 6 years later in
66, I think.
66?
Yeah.
And
no, earlier than that would have been, it must have been 64. 64. No, I think it was 65, because I think I got sick and I had to repeat some of the assignments, so I had to go into the next year.
You were saying you were at the Technical College and then you went to the University of Queensland.
Yes.
So what years were you at the Technical College till?
From 58, 59 and 60.
Okay.
And then we joined forces with the university students.
Okay. And did the course change structure then? Did you do the full-time day course in those days?
No,
at
no,
UQ?
no.
It was still at the
University
just the
students had to go and get a job. And we had to go to uni at night then. And we were also trained in all sorts of aspects of the business of architecture that the university students had absolutely no concept of at all. And we were able to run a job at that stage. We were able to go out and interview our clients. We were able to go and take measurements and site levels and do the budgeting and costing and so forth. Whereas the university students had much more conceptual design sort of experience without the practical side of it.
Do you remember any of your co-students at that time? At either the Technical College or at the University of Queensland?
Edwin Codd was one of them. I had
Then it was Andy Stenders was in that year as well then.
yes, he was. You put me on the spot here to remember names. Graham Snyderwin, who was later the architect for the railways, who did all those design concepts for Toowong and whatever, all the commercial stuff over railway stations, who's remained a great friend over the years.
Was Bob Cullen and Michael Bryce, were they in your year?
Michael Bryce, yes, I think Michael Bryce might have been a year ahead, but I'm sure he and his girlfriend would have come to our place because we were the first ones to be married in the group, and we had children, so we couldn't go out, and everybody was poor, so we used to invite everybody. We were on the river at Norman Park, so we had this lovely view of the river, and everybody bought their own booze, and we had a party.
And what about your teachers? Can you remember any of your teachers?
Oh well, there was Athol Bretnell, who was and Cole Jessup. They were two of the teachers. I can't remember off the cuff any of the others. I'm sure that there's, a lot of these things would come to me afterwards if I'd been able to think about this sort of thing for a while.
So did you know Professor Cummings?
Yes, he was at the university. I think James Birrell also was a little bit later, and some of the names that were talked about in there were familiar to me. And of course, the people that were in Townsville later, when the economy was falling apart in '64, the majority of people who were employees in large offices had to look for jobs, and a lot of my colleagues also went overseas. Being a family person, I didn't have that opportunity to go overseas, so meeting a lot of them later, or not a lot of them, but some of them later, they come back to Australia many years later and had to re-establish themselves. And they, I was envious of them going overseas, but they were envious of me staying behind and having an established practice. So in this downturn in the economy, North Queensland was a place where the provinces where a few things were happening. So I came up here with a partnership promised with Max and Robinson, and a year later I set up my own practice in Townsville.
Before we get into your own practice, can you remember anything about the curriculum or which type of architecture, which architects you were looking at when you were studying? Were there?
Oh, well, Frank Lloyd Wright had something more than just a passing influence. I guess Walter Burley Griffin, who followed on from Frank Lloyd Wright, that sort of architecture seemed to me to be big parasol roofs, lots of shade. That suited this sort of climate. We have, I came from Tully where it rained up to 7 metres a year, and you just needed to have shade from the sun. You needed to have lots of ventilation, and with the high humidity you had to promote that ventilation. So I developed a sort of architecture that I felt was suitable for this region.
Now, were these sorts of ideas being discussed in the curriculum at that time, or were these things that you just picked up on your own through personal reading and interests?
I think I probably picked them up from personal reading. I mean, obviously there were just some touching on Corbusier and Alvaralto and all of those major names, Nervi, etc. But we probably didn't get too deeply into anything. This is the style, and that's the style, and that's the style. I was more interested in the sort of tropical style, so I guess that really channeled me into looking at Frank Lloyd Wright and Walter Burley Griffin, because that sort of architecture was more what I understood. And
it's interesting that you've focused on Frank Lloyd Wright and Walter Burley Griffin, who are both Chicago school architects, which is a very cold climate.
Sure.
Yeah. So
but it's the style of the building with parasol roofs and narrow windows running around the building, so that you get this sort of shade, but you also get the promotion of airflow, which is important. I built a house for a client in Tully because it's very wet there, by building the roof first. The design was, we built the roof and then we built the house underneath it, and there was about 3/4 of a metre of airspace, so that without any need for insulation, like the fettlers camps and the tents, where they put up a tent, then they put a fly over it, and there was an airflow through. And that made the house a lot more comfortable, because it not only stopped the sun from stopped the heat from transferring through into the building, but it also promoted an airflow space, which meant that you had whatever the air temperature was underneath that roof, it was constantly being changed, and it moderated the air inside the house, moderated the house.
And sorry?
I was just going to ask what the date of that project was and the name.
Hondradakis was the client. He was the baker, one of the bakers in Tully. I can't pull a date off the top of my head. I think I was still in Brisbane. Sorry?
Approximate decade?
Oh, it would have been in the 60s.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably in the mid-60s. A little bit later, when I was established in Townsville, I got involved with some state government projects like the fire station in Tully, and I did a little kindergarten there, and
Can I ask one more question about your education before we move on to the practice? Because were you ever taught by Carl Langer, and did you pick up on his ideas about some tropical housing?
I don't think I even met Carl. I knew of him, and I knew of his architecture, but no, I probably didn't get very involved. Eddie Orabin, I was fascinated with Eddie Orabin's hotel redevelopment in here, Hydes, and there was a use of silky oak timbers, and it was quite a nice sort of development.
Were those things also being discussed when you were working at Blychester Bretnell?
No.
There was no notion of we need to do something for this climate, or?
No, I think that the climatic influences probably weren't terribly much involved in changing the design at that stage. I mean, we were certainly conscious of promoting airflow and so forth, but not nearly as much as it was in later years.
And were you familiar with Eddie Hayes and Scott?
Well, Hayes and Scott, yeah, they were practiced, but not really influential in my training. There were
sorry, the music is going louder.
yeah, it's
So,
a bit distracting, isn't it?
So then, you graduated in 1965, and then you came to Cairns.
I didn't come. No, I came to Townsville
Townsville.
In February '66, and came up to Max and Robinson to the promise of a partnership in the practice.
They had an office up in Townsville.
Had an office in Cairns,
in Cairns, yeah.
but their main office was in Townsville.
Okay.
And Kevin Max was the principal, really, and Ren Robinson was in Townsville, and Ren Robinson was running the Cairns office. Now Ren's still alive,
Yeah.
but Kevin's gone now. We also had an office pretty embryonic in Mackay, but that wasn't long-lived. But after 12 months, I was put off. I was a senior person in the office and the highest paid, so they had a tax problem.
Oh.
So,
And do you remember any of the projects that you worked on at Max and Robinson?
oh, the engineering physics building, Midtown Hotel Motel, the Queen's Hotel.
And those were all in Townsville.
They're all in Townsville, yes.
So it was mainly larger projects in that firm?
Yes, it was mostly commercial projects in Townsville.
You said you came up because of the slump in Brisbane, in the economic downturn, and you said things were happening up here in North Queensland.
Yes.
What do you mean by
Well,
that?
Mount Isa, you see, had the mines, the minerals, and they were all being exported out of Townsville. So Townsville was a small city of manufacturing and working and transport and all that sort of stuff. There was a foundry there at one stage, which finally closed up, but the copper refinery was there and the sugar was being exported, and there was a whole lot of happenings because that was really serving the hinterland. And so Townsville was going ahead. Cairns was only a quarter of the size and really hadn't started to happen. There was, small works going on here, but not a lot. It was much later before Cairns started to develop.
So after Max and Robinson, where did you go then?
Well, then I started my own practice in
Then
Townsville.
you started in Townsville.
Yes.
And what was the name of that practice? It
Allan
was just your
Jago.
name.
Yes, my name. And I just employed a secretary for a start, and then a little bit later I had one of the students, and it became obvious that the work wasn't really strong enough, often enough and big enough to build a big office. It was just a one-person practice, and I had draftsperson. And I'd previously started doing lecturing, which Kevin Max passed over to me because he was doing some of the lecturing, and Ralph Power was also involved in that.
So where
Don
were you doing
Roderick.
the lecturing?
At the Technical College in Townsville.
Okay.
And when was that established, or when did
that was
be?
in late 66, I think I started doing that.
And since when did they have a course in architecture?
Yes.
How long? That was established when you started there?
Yeah.
So in 1966?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were you teaching there?
Well, over the period, I've lectured for quite a few years, I think about 8 years, but I was doing different subjects each year, but environmental science, hygiene and sanitation, materials, art appreciation, acoustics, that's 5, I can't think of the others. Ralph was doing design. I can't think of what the others were, but this was essentially an after school, work in the office during the day, 5:30, up to the Technical College, lecture until 9:30.
And it was only the first 3 years?
First 3 years.
Yeah. And who took the initiative to set that up?
Oh, Kevin Max and Don Roderick, I suppose, a few of the others. I don't really have a clear picture of who else was involved in that, but certainly Kevin Max was one of the prime movers.
And was this replacing, well, what was the system prior to the...
Nothing.
Nothing at all?
And that was the problem. You see, we had no way of keeping or employing staff. You couldn't get anybody to come here because they couldn't do their course, and you couldn't get anybody to stay here for any length of time because they would just have to be draftsperson. They couldn't further their studies.
And how big was the intake of students in those first years?
Oh, 10 or 12. We had reasonable numbers, mostly male. We had a few girls, and most of the boys, but a few girls. And it was much like the days when I was studying. I mean, mostly boys and only a few girls. I think out of 50 who started the first year I started, there was 2 or 3 girls.
Do you remember who they were?
Helen Mills was one.
Oh, you were with Helen, yeah.
Can't remember the others.
I remember, well, I don't
I think
have
we had
the-
Kamal was one of the students, but he didn't stay for very long. I don't think he finished the first year.
And when you were teaching up here in Townsville, were you aligned with any institutions down in Brisbane?
Oh yes, we were operating as a remote course from the Queensland Technical College course.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And our students went back there to do their 4th, 5th and 6th years.
Okay. And was that only happening in Townsville, or were
Yes.
there other?
It was only in Townsville.
Only in
That's the only
Townsville.
regional training in Queensland.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting.
But we lost the course. And when was that? In the 70s, because the funding became tighter, and so they pulled back everything back to Brisbane. They gave us excuses like, oh well, you couldn't give the students proper experiences up there, and we said, you know, they could do this and this and this. You won't get that in the city. And also, who are your students? Top students. Oh, this one. Oh, where'd that one come from? Oh, it was one of yours. Oh, where'd that one come from? The year before. Oh, one of yours.
And do you remember any of your students?
A few. Ken Tippett, he's up here. David. Derbyshire.
Derbyshire?
Yeah.
Ah, yes.
There's yeah. I've lost it.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other people teaching there were Kevin, Max and Don Roderick, and who else was teaching there?
Well, Ralph Power was he was doing design.
Yeah.
I mean, in these latter years that I'm talking about, from '67 onwards, when we started to have more established numbers, then the course was fairly well organised, and mind you, we had to organise this ourselves and write our own
Curriculum.
our own curriculum and set our own courses and write our own lectures and so forth. And when I used the building manual with those three, I can't think of the names, like Sokole, and
Zokole?
Sokole, the three names that wrote that book. That was a wonderful book, and I still have that in my library shelves. I still use that because it's a very succinct thing. We had all those building science notes from the Commonwealth that were abandoned many years later. They were a wonderful source of information. So all of that sort of stuff sort of fed into the course, and I would go out and find books and so forth. I would take the students to the art exhibition. We had an art exhibition every year, festival if you like, and the School of Arts would be filled with all these local paintings from all over the north, and I'd take the students down there as a lecture, and we'd spend an hour or so, and they would have a number of paintings to appreciate. And appreciate doesn't mean to say, oh, I don't like that, and I don't like that, I like this one. Appreciate means to evaluate.
Yes.
And that was difficult to get across to people. Those people who had done art, and one of the ladies, one of the girls there in the course, she was well tuned in these sorts of things, so she was able to do quite a good evaluation.
And what was the background of most of the people coming to the course? Were they mostly from families of architects,
I
or
think
from?
they probably just came from high school, got a job in an architect's office, and then started architecture. And they might have come from, well, an industrial type course, or they might have come from an academic course. I can't really say. I didn't see what qualifications they had to start the course. I probably did, but
Well, that sort of leads me to the next question. What type of qualifications did they need? Can you remember that?
yes. Well, you would have to have a pass in something like art, you would have to have physics and chemistry and maths 1 and maths 2 and English. You didn't have to have a language. You can have a language or you could have art.
Mm-hmm.
Art was a bit hard to come by. I had a lot of difficulty doing art at Innisfail because there was no high school in Tully. So I had to get on the rail motor every morning and come up to Innisfail to do my 4 latter years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the only one that was doing art. So I sat in the back of the French school